Well, the White House is looking to remove barriers for America's artificial intelligence industry. Yesterday, President Trump unveiled a new action plan designed to better manage AI in the U.S., including building out infrastructure and clearing regulatory hurdles. The plan comes as the usage of AI has exploded. In fact, in a recent Gallup poll in January, found that 99% of Americans used at least one kind of AI product in a given week. And joining us now from the North Lawn of the White House to discuss this development is Michael Kratsios. He's the director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy and one of the authors of that actual action plan. Sir, thank you for joining us. Let's start with what we saw yesterday. I think there are something like 90 policy recommendations that ultimately came out of this plan. What are some of the major themes and what sort of a timeline can we expect to see them to be implemented?
Yes, so the report of the action plan had three core themes. The first pillar was around innovation. We as a country need to make sure that we are out innovating the rest of the world, and the next great technological discoveries relating to AI happen here in the United States. So a lot of efforts around removing the regulatory red tape that would limit the ability of the U.S. to continue to lead. The second was all about AI infrastructure. We need to be able to build the great data centers and the power that we need to power them ultimately and make sure that we can run all these models here in the U.S. So a lot of work needs to be done on the permitting side to make this a reality. And the third pillar is all about AI diplomacy. We want our great technology, our models, our compute, and our chips to be exported around the world. We want it to be the gold standard for the rest of the world to use. And what's great about this report and something the president really wanted was to make sure that these actions are things that could be done today. So we're working very hard, and these are things you'll be seeing in the next 6 months that we're able to execute.
And one of the criticisms of this plan is that, yes, there's a lot of emphasis on deregulation, but there isn't as much emphasis on safety or guardrails. Are there any sort of safety precautions that this administration thinks developers should be emphasizing as this technology advances?
Yes, absolutely. There's certainly a balanced approach to the action plan. Some things that are specified in the action are evaluations around national security concerns, things that we want to make sure aren't necessarily happening with these models, things like biological risks that are being evaluated. There's also a lot of emphasis on metrology, or the science of measuring these models. How can we as a country be able to do a much better job of understanding how to evaluate these models and make sure that they're performing the way that they're intended to? So there's a big emphasis on that throughout the report as well.
Another focus I know of the Trump administration has been on political bias in AI, especially when it comes to things like those language learning models. Who is ultimately responsible for determining the ideological bias in some of these technologies?
Well, the challenge that we've seen for many years is that some of this ideological bias was baked into these models. And what the president, an executive order that he signed on the very first day in office, was to eliminate and remove this Marxist DI ideology from the federal government. And what was done yesterday through executive order was to make sure that any large language models that are procured by the federal government or used by the federal government do not have this DI ideology within it. And it's a big step forward to match what we've been doing in so many other parts of the administration.
And so is that something that your office is ultimately responsible for, or what is that kind of review process? How does that look?
So the Office of Management and Budget here at the White House is responsible for developing procurement guidelines, or the guidelines around what services and products the U.S. government buys. And as stated in the executive order, they will be running a process to update the procurement guidelines to reflect this approach by the admin.
Also during the event yesterday, we heard the president talk about a, quote, single federal standard, saying you can't have 50 different state regulations. Is that something that the White House is ultimately going to have to call on Congress to do, some sort of federal standard that applies to all 50 states when it comes to AI technology?
Yes, preemption is something that we're going to have to work with Congress to achieve. The president was very clear in his speech that it's very important to him that we have a single rule of the road when it comes to AI, and we don't have a patchwork created by each state having its own set of rules. So I think there is a path forward, but we'll have to work together with Congress to make sure that we have a solution to this problem that in any way can continue to empower technology companies, but also protect Americans the way that many states intend.
And thinking a little bit more about the future and how the U.S. can best harness some of this AI technology, what are some of the areas that you are most excited about in terms of how the United States can harvest and develop AI to essentially advance the country?
Yeah, I think the two big ones that always stand out for me are healthcare and material science. So in healthcare, we want to be able to use artificial intelligence to find new cures and new therapies for many of the diseases that affect many Americans. The other piece is we can use artificial intelligence for material science, for creating new novel materials that can be used to make better nuclear power plants that are safer and all sorts of things out there. And that's where I think AI can make a really big difference.
All right, Michael Kratsios, the director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Sir, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.